Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pynakker, and I'm very excited to have a very special guest on the program. This is our third annual post-mortem, post-conference discussion about Sunstone. And we're gonna get to it with Gene, my good friend Gene Judson here. Of course, has his program, the Latter Daily Digest, which, by the way, a little birdie tells me you're gonna be interviewing John Dehlin tomorrow. Is that true, sir?
It is true, and if I can do the editing really fast, I'll try to air it on we'll say noon Pacific time on Saturday or maybe the following day.
Okay, so watch for the interview with John Dehlin. It will have probably already been released by the time you see this. You never know. Maybe I'll do this sooner because we fly by the seat of our pants here at MBR. I still don't know what episode I'm releasing today nor tomorrow, but that's typically how I like to operate. Very impromptu and also agenda free in many ways. I just do things just for the fun of it. But I just wanted to say a couple things real quick. First of all, I just wanted to remind people we do have a merch store at mormonbookreviews.com. And we recently had our payment method pulled and we redid it. So I just want to let people know that if you tried ordering something on there, it's back and it's fixed. And I want you to encourage you to check out the website. And we haven't sold anything for a while, and I really haven't been pushing it. So that's why I'm talking about it now. And of course, I have links in the description for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel. Thank you to our people who are supporting us. Couldn't do it without you. So, Gene, let's see here. Well, first of all, I'm going to switch hats for a second here because of course, one of the reasons I always go to the Sunstone is to umpire the kickball game between Team Outer Darkness, which is the Exmos, and Team Higher Law, which is the Fundamentalists. And I don't know, I think for whatever reason, I think Team Outer Darkness fits me better. What do you think?
I think so. It was made for you.
The hat fits better. That's what I'm saying. That's all that I'm saying, folks. The hat.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to talk to you about I've described Sunstone as where Burning Man meets Mormonism. And it's kind of this hodgepodge of just all these different groups of people. You'll have polygamists there, you have evangelicals there, you have atheists there, you have transgender people there, you have church employees there, you have BYU professors there, you'll have just progressive Mormons, traditional Mormons, and people from the community of Christ and different branches of the restoration. It's kind of a cool place. It's kind of like what we are at MBR, which is like a hodgepodge of different voices of the restoration, which I think there's a good mix here for MBR and Sunstone. I want to say, folks, this year, because of my health condition, I was unable to come. So apparently they actually didn't even do the kickball tournament this year. And I'm saddened to hear that, but hopefully I'll be able to be back next year to continue the tradition. Gene, my man in the house, how you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on the show again. Yeah, apparently you're a good person to blame for not having the kickball tournament. It's like, oh, because Steve's not making it, we might as well just cancel the whole thing. So there you go. That's the power you hold. And also I call Sunstone sometimes Mormon Con.
Yes, Mormon Con. I like
Yeah,
that too.
Comic Con.
Yeah. And I want to encourage people. It's a blast. I'll tell you the one thing, it's crazy for people to travel because it's like at the height of travel season whenever Sunstone is. So when I fly, there is not an empty seat in the plane. It's like it's just always crazy. And I remember thinking like, man, this is a crazy time of year to have a conference. But really it's perfect because people don't have the kids are out of school and it's right at the height of summer and it really is fun. And it's been around for many decades now. It's become a very it's especially under Lindsay Henson Park's leadership, it seems to have really um, found its voice, if you will, and seems to really have been found like a real stable environment that they have. It's well organized, and it's one of the bigger conferences that is within the restoration. So I wasn't able to make it, Gene, but you were able to. So just kind of give me an overview. Generally, how was it? It was at the University of Utah this year, not the normal venue. So just to kind of paint a picture of what it was, kind of a general picture of what it was like.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the University of Utah is the normal over the last maybe 20 years.
Okay.
Maybe more than half of the last 20 years have been there. And I don't know why, if COVID or something else happened that changed the
Okay.
venue. And interestingly enough,
And just real quick, Gene, how many Sunstones have you been to now?
this was my third.
Okay, and this would have been my third. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is your third.
So I
And
would say it was much nicer to not have you there, but that wouldn't be the truth.
well, I do know that people I've heard I got a lot of people like you sending me pictures from Sunstone, people posting stuff on the Reddits, hearing from people who are saying that, yeah, your name came up in a conversation here, Steve. And so I know that my ears were burning a few times during the Sunstone conference. So I'm probably talked about, and it's pretty wild to think that 3 years ago nobody knew who I was, and now it's weird to
Now
experience
you're
this.
having an impact on the whole event.
It's great. Yeah. Well, they canceled the kickball tournament. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So, well, I love doing this with you every year, Gene. And so, yeah, continue. Just tell us just overall. So it's at the UV University of Utah campus.
Yeah.
Was it
So that
how well attended was it? Like compared to the last two that you've been to, would you say it's about the same, a larger turnout?
it was at the Student Union building, and it's hard to say for sure. I haven't seen the numbers. A lot of people commented that it seemed fewer people. Now, I'm not exactly sure why. This one is on multiple levels of, like it's on the second floor and the fourth floor, different rooms. And so I don't know if, people aren't crossing over, the paths more like they did at the America, whatever convention center in Sandy, or if it was actually fewer people were there. It's hard to say for sure.
Well,
Michelle and I worked at the front desk, and
okay.
Michelle commented that the stacks of name tags seemed to be a lot lighter.
Okay.
And so I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it did seem to most people that there were fewer this year. I don't know why it would be different. It was the first week of August instead of the
It
last
was,
week of
yeah, it was
July.
a little bit later in the year than typical. And
And maybe people had stuff going on the
yeah,
first
yeah.
of July of
That's
August and
that's usually like the kind of tail end of vacation season in during the summer. I
maybe
mean,
it's back to school time. Yeah,
schools
for some
start
people.
this Monday in Florida.
Yeah.
So August 12th. So well, let me ask you about the first night. So of course, Thursday night they have an open free to the open to the public. They'll have a the what do you call them? The keynote speaker. And how was the crowd for that compared to like last year's keynote speech?
So I would have to say it seemed that there were fewer people there as
Okay.
well. They were working also on campus. Some of the roads were closed, and you had
Wow.
to go around things,
Yep.
and I don't know, maybe people that went the last 2 years thought that it would be unfamiliar territory, and so they decided to skip some of the
No,
things.
I even heard I was talking to BYU professor. He said, "Oh yeah, I was going to go," and then I saw that it was at the UV campus, so I decided not to go. So I think there was some of that too. Well, okay, well, just tell us. The first
So
night
so
was
yeah. So the whole title of the event is called New Rooms and Heirlooms. They like to have themes. And so, and then Leah Sodali, or she told me the pronunciation of her name, but I totally forgot it. It was
well, hold up the book, hold up the book.
closer to Sodali than it is to Sotile. That's all
Okay,
I know.
and so she
The
was the one
moon
that
turns
came
to
on.
blood.
She's one of the. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to be in touch with her. I think I might have some backdoor connections to her, but again, I got so many different names I got to follow. But she, of course, wrote a book about the Chad Daybell trial. Of course, I've had Chad Daybell's neighbor on my program multiple times to talk about this horrendous thing. So many people in the true crime community are familiar with our podcast because of the work that we've done regarding the Lori Vallow and the Chad Daybell thing. So, how was that speech received, and how did you enjoy it?
So it was pretty good. In a way, she did her speech. The first half of her speech would be like if she came on my show, Ladder Daily Digest, where we honor creators and talk about the creator's journey. So she kind of said her story of how she got to be in that place where she had been an investigative journalist and had done some other things. And then one day, out of the blue, her husband said something about, "Hey, have you heard about these missing children?" So it was right when the children were missing in Idaho, and so she was like, "I don't really do missing children, but that's interesting." So she started following the story at that point, and then eventually the children were discovered murdered. And since then, Lori Vallow and Chad Dable were found guilty of those murders, and other murders I think are on the docket in the future
Hmm.
as well.
Yes, yes, and
So her,
we'll be continuing to cover that here at MBR as well, and maybe we'll get her on to talk about that. So first night, that a nice, pretty decent turnout. People come out for that. They hear of this great author talk about the Daybell trial, and then tell me just overall Friday, Saturday, how did that go?
so yeah, like I say, Michelle and I volunteer at the desk so we could save a little bit of money. So if anybody wants to volunteer sometime, you get free admission, but you
Yeah.
might miss a couple of events here and there. Um, Started off with a little devotional by Robert Reese, and he talked about how that human beings have possessed, you know, the wonder, right? A feeling of wonder and awe about life and other things. And so he did a little talk about that, but I missed that. And so the first thing I attended was I'm scrolling. And I also was like the unofficial photographer. So I would actually peek in to different events and take a picture and then listen for 10 minutes and then move on. So Lindsay presented about the Sunstone Mormon History podcast, so everybody can go to her podcast. And I also know that for Sunstone, they have the audio available for purchase for each of the, um, for a few bucks for each of the presentations, or you can join and buy membership and get access to all of them. And so, yeah, it's really hard to figure out exactly where I was. Oh, then I had interviewed a few people prior to Sunstone. I called them Sunstone Sneak Peek, and one was titled "Sound Meditation with a Mormon Witch," and so I
About eight
released a
years
little video
ago,
about that. And so it was interesting. It was fun to see her in person after I had interviewed her. And then Cheryl Bruno had a William Marks Legacy of Faith. Um,
Oh
that
yeah, and matter of fact, Cheryl, the my friends over at the publisher sent me a copy of that book. Oh, here it is. Greg Hofford books. So I got that right. Oh, no, not that one. Here we go. There we go. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to having her on to talk about that. Yeah, and the co-author.
Natasha Helfer had some, let's say,
Yeah.
sexual advice in a couple
Yes.
different sessions. Um, then there was Joe Geisner had Writing Mormon History 2. He has a second edition from
Yes.
his first
Yes.
edition. So he had a
And,
few of the
I
writers there, and they had a little session where people could do Q&A with them.
yeah, as a matter of fact, I if I hadn't fallen ill, I would have interviewed Joe about that last spring when it first came out. I do plan on having a panel discussion like we did for the first book. We're going to have them back on for the second book. So I'm glad they're able to do something at Sunstone. That's great.
And Ganesh Chirian did Finding Joseph in the Book of Mormon. His book is supposedly coming out soon, we'll say this fall. He sort of announced it on Mormon Stories a year ago that he was going to do this book. But what he has done is he has given advanced sort of PDFs to fellow, we'll say, historians who have, sort of fact checked what he had to say and gave him tips and pointers. And so he has been reworking his book a little bit. So it's still to be published, but soon, he says.
Okay.
And I actually, now that I'm recalling, I met John Dehlin again. He showed up, which was different. He
Yes.
hasn't been to
And
any of the other Sunstones.
I have to say, I want to tell you that a couple of years ago, I was out for Sunstone and I was like, John, you got to get back to Sunstone. You got to get back. We had lunch and he said, he hopes that one day he would be able to get out there. And so then I see somebody posted, it was Moroni Lopez Jessup
Mhm.
posted on Facebook. I met John Dehlin today for the first time. He's a really nice guy. And I was just like, so I texted John while he was still at Sunstone. I said, hey, how you liking Sunstone? He says, it's nice to be back. It's been a long time. And so he was really happy to be able to be part of the Sunstone community once again.
Yeah, so he wandered the halls a little bit, said hi to some people, took some photos. I don't think he joined in any of the classes or anything. He might have, but I said to him, "Hey, John, um, I have a whole bunch of books now because a few years ago you started saying everybody support Mormon historians, Mormon authors,
Yep.
and if you buy this book, I will buy you ice cream." I said, "Well, here I am, ready to collect." And so he kind of laughed like, "Oh, I don't eat ice cream anymore. That's why I'm so thin lately." And it's like, okay. And then an hour later, I get a text from him and he says, "Hey, I'm free for an hour. Meet me at some gelato place in Holiday." And so instead of going to some of the sessions, Michelle and I headed off and had John buy me ice cream. Michelle said, "Don't make him pay." It's like, well, he made me buy books. So,
It's only fair. Yeah.
so yeah. So because we met, I secured the spot for the interview. He put me on the schedule for tomorrow morning, and so that's how, for sure, we got on a calendar. Maven Brody's going to join me as co-host, and also um, Megan Connor is going to join as well. I don't know whether we're going to do three interviewers for one interviewee, or if I'm going to sort of let the two women do most of the interviewing, and I'm going to like do it back off the stage sometimes and let them interact together. Megan, I promised that she could, we could do a co-branding thing, and she can release it on her channel at the same time, which is can't remember what her channel is, but it's basically about helping people, go through life events and trauma and stuff like that. She has a lot of good help, and so we'll see how that works. And I might pull a Maven from when she was on Mormonism Live, and just like show up whenever I have a comment or a question to make, and we'll see how that goes.
Well, as long as your hair's purple, that would be fine.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I'm gonna have to do something about that. But actually, she doesn't have purple hair anymore, so
But my
maybe.
classic image of Maven is this disembodied voice that we heard on Mormonism Live, and then this girl with the purple hair popping in now and then. And
That's
I
right.
found her to be an intriguing person, and of course, I consider her to be a good friend. So you had ice cream or gelato with Johnny D. That's great. I'm glad you're able to do that. You and Michelle are lovely people, and that's wonderful. So
Yeah,
any other high?
the first night was they also had trivia night at the Gilgal Gardens. Have you ever been there?
Oh
That's
yeah.
where there's a sphinx with Joseph Smith's head that somebody
Oh
carved in their
well. So can
backyard.
I tell you some MBR lore
Yeah,
about Gilgal Gardens? Now that was the all closing night or first night that they had the Gilgal
we did
Gardens.
it on the first night
Okay, so they have a trivia
because
night. Okay,
because the last night instead of the softball, I mean the kickball game, they had
was there like a movie screening or
they
something?
had the heirlooms portion where there was storytelling. People would tell stories about heirlooms and how they would be important in their lives, and so they told stories about that. Um, Sarah, I think Burlingame from Wyoming was the final storyteller, and she talked about how, as a queer person, her grandfather's letters were destroyed by her mother because her grandfather was gay, and they didn't want people to know about his gayness, and she felt such a loss to not have his love letters to other men be something that she could cherish. And so to her, it was like an heirloom lost, we'll say.
Oh wow.
And so anyway, at the Gilgal Gardens, they had the
Yes.
trivia night, and it seems to me that either I'm getting dumber or the questions are getting harder and harder each year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, no, I can imagine. Well, I think too is that people are just reading more. They're getting more access to more podcasts, more information. When I think of when I started this podcast 3 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of people doing this, and actually some people have even said you were kind of a trailblazer to kind of show that you don't have to be a well-known person. You can be somebody who lives in a mobile home in Florida with his mom and have an impactful podcast. And so I think I kind of inspired and of course helped start a lot of podcasts as well. I had a lot of podcasters come on my program, helped launch them throughout the years. Me and Rebecca did a lot of stuff like that for a couple of years. And so just to give you an example, so the very first time I ever went out to Utah was in June of 2021. And that was for the Mormon History Association conference. This is MBR lore. And so I'm going to get picked up by Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents. Of course, I was all excited because I never met Rick. And of course, he's wearing a big yellow, I think, Gospel Tangents t-shirt, which, by the way, I was seated next to uh, Thomas Monson's personal nurse. I sat next to on the airplane, had some interesting stories to tell. That was really fascinating. So I knew this was special when I'm sitting next to Thomas Monson's personal nurse or previous one. And so Rick goes to me and says, well, do you want to go to see the Sphinx? I said, the Joseph Smith Sphinx? And he said, yeah. I said, let's do it right now. So the very first place we visited, I think it was either before or after Crown Burgers. I don't remember. We went to Gilgal Gardens and saw the Joseph Smith Sphinx. And what's so funny to me is I talked to so many people from Utah, especially like Mormon missionaries, and I'll show them the picture because it's actually on my phone. I have me in the background. You can kind of see it over the apps. That's me standing next to the Sphinx. So that was many people who lived in Utah all their lives have never even heard of it. So it's kind of crazy that that's the first place I got to visit, a place that many people who've lived their entire lives in Utah have never been to. So it's kind of interesting just to think about like why do I know about this in my 50-year-old mobile home in Florida? And people who live a few blocks away had never been there. So
It's,
it,
you know, in that whole area is akin to something that's in Florida where somebody did out of
yes.
a bunch of statues
Yep.
and things. Have you
Mhm.
ever been to that place? And how far is it from you?
It's on the other side of the other coast, and I actually um I want to get out there. I'd love to do it because yeah, it reminded me of that same guy that did some, like an eccentric person who did these. By the way, Gilgal Gardens is these gardens located in downtown Salt Lake City. That was an eccentric guy, kind of built this really interesting sculptures, and a lot of it's Book of Mormon related, and it's really fascinating. And it's free to public. Check it out. It's really awesome.
Just a few blocks east and south of the temple.
But this is what I found out. I just found out recently that 42 minutes away is Solomon's Castle from where I live, and it's a castle built all from aluminum, and it's open to the public. And it kind of reminded me of one of those eccentric people who builds these eccentric things. Like, and it's in the middle of nowhere, Florida. So I just went on their website and saw that it's closed during the month of August. But I'm going to get out to Solomon's Castle sometime soon. It seems like a really cool
Right.
site.
We
I
all
love
know
that kind of
how
stuff.
we all know how Solomon was big on aluminum.
Yes, 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 yes. So, Gene, any more highlights you want to discuss from this from this?
So yeah, so the next day, Saturday, Michael Marquardt and Claire Barris spoke about Joseph Smith Sr. and Heber C. Kimball's visions, dreams, and prophetic utterances. Joseph Smith Sr. was the first, what's it called?
Patriarch.
Patriarch, right. And so he would give blessings for 50 cents or $2 each or whatever they were. And they have people, scribes wrote a lot of them down, and we have a lot of those. And so Michael Marquardt talked about those. And so that was actually pretty interesting. And so let's see what else. Ben Park talked about his book. They had a panel that critiqued him, and I missed most of the critiquing, but I heard it was an amazing event where he took the criticism and they had a nice, sort of a historian back and forth, and it was very agreeable, but there were things that could have been better. And that's part of what Sunstone's about, is about presenting papers and allowing criticism of the paper so that the history can get better and better and better. That's the whole purpose behind Sunstone, actually.
Yeah. And I just want to share some more MBR lore just because I don't know. But before I had the MBR logo and I started my channel, it was Mormon Book Reviews, and it was just the generic M, right? And I thought I need to have something that's not more than just a generic, because there was LDS book reviews and all he had was an L. So what I did was I took a picture of Kingdom of Nauvoo and I took a picture of this, and this became my logo for like the first 6 months to a year of the channel. So this was actually the original MBR logo, because I
Ben
happened to be
Park's
reading
book.
that book at the time.
Yeah,
And that was, of course, written by Benjamin Park. So that's why I brought that up.
yeah. And Rob Lauer gave a presentation on Reform Mormonism.
Yeah, that's great. And Rob's been on to talk about the Reform Mormonism movement as well. And I actually want to get him back on. And so I was glad to hear that he was able to participate.
Yeah, I did an episode with him that I titled "The Best of Joseph Smith," where it's basically that's what Reform Mormonism does: is they throw away anything they think is bad and toxic, like polygamy, and they think about the sort of innovations maybe that Joseph Smith may have had, even though he may have borrowed some of his innovations from other people, uh, like Emanuel Swedenborg and some other people like that. So anyhow, there are a few other things, and sort of a highlight for me was this presentation.
Okay, so that's interesting because I've been in touch with Lars, and I'm going to be watching Dan Vogel's. I actually been meaning to watch Dan Vogel's response to it. Overall, what did you think of it?
So Dan Vogel is very harsh about it because, I mean, you know, if somebody said to you, "Hey, I have a lottery ticket, and God said to me, it's a winner, and I'm just going to cherish it and keep it and not turn it in because I don't want to be ruined by the vast wealth." You would think, well, maybe, right? But more than likely, it's not the winning ticket, right? But if somebody else says, "Hey, I have two tickets and one of them's a winner," that person at least has twice the chance of winning of the almost non-existent chance from the first person. And so that is sort of how Dan Vogel might critique Lars by saying there are other things that are more plausible. And for Lars's construct to work, you have to have a lot of more what ifs, and you have to bring people who were maybe 50 miles away to the certain location where like Cindy Rignan would be or something like that. You have to add things that don't exist historically. And so Dan is very critical, but it's not like Sidney Rigdon and whoever Lars was trying to connect with Sidney were on different continents. 50 miles away is just a day and a half's journey back then, right? Maybe even, I don't know how fast it that you could go.
So this guy one of those people that advocates that Sidney Rigdon may have had a hand in producing the Book of Mormon?
Yeah, so it attaches an additional layer into this the Rigdon Spalding theory, where a writer in France called Monmore, and so if you switch his name around, it becomes Mormon, and that was a typical literary device that people would do back then, apparently. And this Mormon author had Nephi and Moroni as characters in his book.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyhow, and there's other, or maybe it's another writer in France at the same time.
Okay.
And so I can't remember for sure, but there's this extra layer where there could have been an influence of that influenced the Spalding Rigdon manuscript, lost manuscript thing, and then you know, because there are lots of potential sources for Joseph Smith in writing the Book of Mormon, right? We have evidence of the King James Bible from the 1700s where passages are pretty much put into the Book of Mormon. So you figure he used that text as something. And there's lots of other, we'll say, Methodist sermons of the day that are reflected in King Benjamin's sermons in the Book of Mormon. And so all those things point to 19th century creation. And it shows that authors usually don't just scramble letters together to make up their own words. I mean, for Joseph, maybe Curlum and Cummum might be the closest ones that are like that. But there's lots of evidence that there's potential things in the Joseph Smith's arena of existence where he could have gotten those things from. Like there was an argument a long time ago that Alma is a girl's name, and here Joseph Smith says there's Alma as a boy, and then a male, and then someone finds records just in like northern New York where there's 30 men named Alma,
Yeah.
a lot of them within a few miles of Joseph. So there's potential references to all these things, and so
Yeah, no,
Lars,
it's interesting because, and again, this is taking a naturalistic explanation because, a lot of people would say, well, you know, the translator was a 19th century person, so the translator's influence on the record on the translation process would be 19th century. And even Brigham Young says later on, he says, if the Book of Mormon were found today, it'd be a different translation. He
right?
even recognized that it was there, that would have been part of, and Jonathan Neville talks about that with his work with Jonathan Edwards as well. So I think it's really fascinating to kind of look at it. I tell people, I said, you can look at the Book of Mormon through a 19th century lens or an ancient lens. There are there are times when people make arguments that it is based on an ancient source. Even D. Michael Quinn believes that it's based on an ancient source, and this is like the go-to guy for all the Exmos, right? So there's a lot of complexity to the different theories about the Book of Mormon. But I will say what I find so fascinating is this whole Sidney Rigdon Spalding
Building,
thing. Actually, there's actually, in one sense, I'm here. Well, let me put it this way. I have connections and I talk to people and I've had sit downs with people who are scholars. And there's some fairly substantial people with some pretty good credentials that are pursuing this Sidney Rigdon thing, which I find truly fascinating. So this thing isn't dead yet. Just letting you know, there will be works coming out. I'm being prescriptive. I'm being
yeah.
descriptive, not prescriptive here. I'm just telling you what some of the stuff's coming down the pike.
Yeah. So, like you say, if it was written today, instead of there being a book of life that would have everybody's information written, it'd be a backup hard drive of life, right? Because we have computers now. So, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I have this idea that maybe in a few years, AI will take all the different theories, all the different words written here and there and everywhere, and there will be a grand unifying composition of the Book of Mormon theory that will stem from everything. And I think that Lars' book has a good chance of impacting that, someday. And so
Well,
anyhow,
just so you know, whenever the Book of Mormon, the translation process is going to be brought up, we're going to go on a tangent. So we're going to do that. So
yeah.
any more highlights?
So the last hour, just before food, featured Alyssa Grenfell. And she has written a book called How to Leave the Mormon Church. And she presented sort of an overview of her book, which was okay. She didn't really talk that much about her story. Now, her story was shown in a Mormon Stories episode by John Dehlin, I think in January, late January, early February of this year. John Dehlin wrote the foreword. So I actually got John Dehlin to sign the forward page, and I got Alyssa to sign, the author page. And so I don't know if very many people are going to have that. Hopefully it'll be worth, $50 someday.
So let me ask you: was Sandra Tanner at this year's event? Did you see her?
She did. She
Okay.
came. She even came by herself
She usually does.
because somebody was going to come with her, and she just shows up and she walks around and says hi to people. And she's a lovely lady. She's a wonderful person, and it's fun to see her. And anyway,
Yeah, and I know Rick Bennett was there. I mean, there's so many people. Matt Harris was there. Oh my gosh! And this was the first time Matt Harris and John Dehlin ever met physically. Was at with Sunstone. I had no idea. That neither one of them have met. I've met both of them for years now, and it's surprising that it took all this time for them to actually be in the same room together.
that's right. The Wednesday before Sunstone, at the Weller bookstore,
Yep.
there was a signing with Matt, and John showed up for that, for the first half of that. and got to chat with Matt and stuff like that. And my joke for the Weller bookstore is that it beat out 100 years ago the Gooder bookstore, because Weller is slightly more, English construction.
Yeah, more gooder or more good, if you
More
will.
Gooder or more Weller, but anyway. And so
So,
that was a fun event as well. Summer Rain Barrett,
yeah,
who's been your part-time co-host,
and
she
yours. Yep.
sort of moderated and asked questions of Matt. And Matt quite frequently said, "Wow, that's a good question." Also, Nate, and I can't remember his last name, Bird. No, I can't
Is
remember
he
for
from the
sure.
Black Menaces
From the
or?
Black
Yeah.
Menaces, he was there with Summer, and so that was a very good. It was 30 people were there, which I think is pretty well attended for a
Yeah,
book
that's really good for a
signing
book
event.
signing.
And so that was where, so I was there where Matt got to meet
Well, that's
John
great.
Dehlin.
Well,
And also, oh, Dan, another highlight was Dan McClellan gave the plenary on Saturday, and that was very well attended.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And Dan's a funny guy, and he's a smart guy, and it was really good. And so I actually, since he does a lot of TikToks and Alyssa Grenfell does a lot of TikToks, I actually inserted myself in saying, "Hey Dan, you want to meet Alyssa Grenfell?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, the TikToker." And so yeah, so I make myself seem more important than I really am
That
by
is
doing some
great.
little things
Well,
like that.
that's the thing, Gene. The one thing that people need to understand is one of the cool things about attending all these different conferences, where there's Mormon History Association, Sunstone. Maybe I'll get to John Whitmer this year. I actually went to my ear doctor yesterday. We went over the MRIs and we went over the lab work, and I'm a pretty healthy specimen. Just found out that I have a deviated septum. She said you probably had since you were a little kid, and she says as long as you're still breathing fine, you're fine. But that was the only thing they found. But that's the thing is that going to these conferences, you get to rub elbows with people that you wouldn't you've seen on your screen all these years. You've read their books, but get out to these conferences. Get out to Whitmer in St. George. You can still sign up. I think the early bird sign up's still going on right now as we speak. Get out to these conferences, get to know these people. It's wonderful to be able to rub shoulders with people when you read their books and you've watched their programs. It was a thrill to have my very first interview I ever did was with Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents. I just thought that was amazing. And then you know who my second interview was with? It was, well, Christopher Thomas, Pentecostal, reads the Book of Mormon. And my third was Matt Harris. And and that was so cool for Matt to take the time. And it was actually Matt Harris that came up with the idea for last year's Whitmer presentation, in which David Boyce of 52 Churches, myself, and Rick Bennett gave a thing about podcasting Mormon history, or talking about the different groups within Mormonism that we talked to during our podcasts. And that was Matt's idea. So that's really cool to be part of that. It's really amazing for me just to think for three years ago, basically nobody knew who I was. They were starting to get to know me maybe 3 years ago, but really still I was still kind of an unknown person. And over the course of these last 3 years, it's been tremendous. I know I've had recent health issues, and I want to thank everybody for all your thoughts and prayers. I am doing much better. I'm learning just to block out the sound. That's the key thing, is just to block out. I tell
Mind
people
over matter.
it is mind over matter. I look, last weekend I did 4 interviews um over the course of 48 hours, weekend before last, and did 6.5 hours of taping. And I tell people, imagine you're asking a question to your guest. You're listening to their answer and you're formulating a follow-up question while somebody's screaming in your ear. It's
Yeah,
just learning to train the brain to cut it off.
like doing an interview underneath an operating Liberty Bell.
Yes, it's crazy. And actually my doctors are amazed. I said, just from where I was a few months ago to where I'm at, it's remarkable, the recovery. And for many people, they say it would take years, and for whatever reason, been just mind over matter. But I also think it was because of all the stress and PTSD and trauma that I experienced in my life. It's like, this ain't nothing. I've been through worse. So anyway, Gene, I just want to thank you so much. First of all, I met you about 3 years ago for the first time.
Yeah,
Um,
two years ago.
no, I
It was,
think,
it was at
oh, it's been
Mormon
two
History
years. Okay.
Association. Right, because it was you, it was my first and your second Mormon History Association. So 2022, May, end of May, beginning of June 2022. But we had been friends on Facebook for six
Right.
months or something like
Okay.
that already. And so I actually brought another book that I'm wondering if you were like a ghost author to this book.
Okay.
Uh, it's a book of useless information.
Earth
It
is the
doesn't
only
have
planet
an
named
author,
after
so
a
I was
guy.
wondering if if you are full of useless information, you were able to impart some of it
I
in
am.
this book. It's
Yeah.
only this thick.
Yeah. Pre-internet, pre-internet, I was the internet. Like
There
at
you
the
go.
bar, they go, "Oh, ask Steve, he'd know." So yes, because again, I'm autodidactic in many different categories. It's pretty crazy.
I was going to
Um,
have you sign this if you showed up. But actually,
thanks, Gene. Appreciate
so
it.
I'm thinking of coming to the Whitmer, and so if that adds a little bit extra incentive for you to go, I'll bring this book. I don't see any other author, so I'll just assign you as part of that.
Okay. Well, I'd like to get out to St. George this year. I've never been to Southern Utah, and I want to tell you, John Whitmer it's a smaller affair than MHA, but it's still pound for pound. They do a great job. They run a really good conference, and I'm a member of both the organizations, MHA and JWHA, and I'm proud to be members of both, and proud to have given presentations to both too. And that to me has been a real honor just to be in those spaces. And so. Either way, Gene, I just want to tell you, everybody loves you and appreciates you. And I want to remind folks real quick before we let Gene go. Oh, hold on one second. Let me do a little quickie thing here because I want to do some screen share because whenever I have a guest on, I want to be able to promote them. And so I want to share with my audience. This is the YouTube channel, Ladder Daily Digest. And let's go. Yep. And this is a channel that now is closing in on 1,000 subscribers. You've got over 100 videos now. And of course, you do a lot of stuff with Maven. You do some stuff with Summer Rain. So I'm subscribed. I'm going to unsubscribe real quick because I always like doing let's see, unsubscribe. And then don't worry, I'm going to resubscribe. And now, everybody, when you see it, go there and hit subscribe and check out Ladder Daily Digest, which often does do a lot of daily stuff. I've noticed recently. You've been putting
Lately,
out a lot of
yeah,
product, my friend.
I've been cranking stuff out. Um, Maven wanted to take a break for a little while, and that gave me an opportunity to not have to worry about her schedule and a guest schedule and try to match everything. I
Yeah.
was just free to just do whatever I want, come up with an idea of sneak peek for Sunstone that if I had thought of a month earlier, I probably could have had, 20 more videos just on
Yeah,
those.
well, you know what? I will say you did your sneak peek of Sunstone. You did a really good job with those people, but I got Chino Blanco, and he hasn't done anything in 7 years since Mormon
I,
Stories, and I thought that
I
was a
told
great
him
interview.
I was really glad that he went on your show because you did a much better job interviewing them than I would have done. And so I appreciate it.
Well, don't sell yourself short, Gene. It takes some time, just to find your voice and your cadence and everything like that. And I can't imagine I haven't watched any of my old stuff for a while. I imagine I'd probably be kind of cringy now looking at some of it, but either way, it's great what we're doing. I love that we're getting this information out there. I love that Gene, some guy who lives in Northern California, loves to wear his tie-dye shirts and comes and now he's got a voice in the restoration as well. Gene, thanks for coming on the program for our annual postmortem.
That's right. Thanks, Steve. It's awesome. I looked at our first interview a little bit ago, and I was like nervous, and there was a little bit of glow, a little bit of sweat, going down my brow, and trying to struggle to come up with words, putting words together to complete a sentence. But so it's feel much
That's
more.
that's what I do. I love to take people that nobody's ever heard of. Nobody knew Gene except on the line, and we gave you a voice, and now you've got yourself your own program. So that's great. Well, folks, leave your comments in the description if you've been to Sunstone, or would you like to go, or also tell us your experiences meeting different people at Sunstone. What was that like for you? It's really awesome to. I wish these are the times I wish lived in Utah because almost every other night I could be attending some different book signing conference. Oh, I just feel so jealous. So maybe I'll just permanently move there. I don't know. But either way, leave your comments in the description. For those of you who'd like to financially support the channel, again, we do have MormonBookReviews.com as well as different PayPal, Venmo, and Patreon. So those of you want to send us some money, it's always greatly appreciated. Couldn't do it without you. But the most important thing is this. Remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.